Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me congratulate the organizers of this seminar for the initiative they have taken at an appropriate time in the history of our country. And on a personal note, the Honorable Deputy Minister referred to the fact that he worked at the NDB when I was the CEO. I want to relate something to you. When I interviewed him and trying to persuade Iran to join the NDB, he told me one thing. I was trying to tell him, Iran, you should sit in my seat in a couple of years, because we were looking out for succession. He told me two things, Ranjit. One is that I like to continue preaching at my church, which I do now. I said, no problem, I don't see, we don't work on Sundays, and the preaching is normally on Sundays. And so, second, he said, I want to get into politics. I said, immediately, why don't you work a few years here? And that's what we agreed. He had this intention of moving into politics. Many, as he said, thought he was making a foolish decision. And as CEO, he had to leave the position at short notice and move on to Parliament. And what a great, fortunate event that was for the country. So I'm really proud of the contribution that he makes and continues to make, and I'm sure he'll play a greater role in future Sri Lanka. With those words, I also need to preface my remarks by saying that these are my personal views. I work for the government, and as a government servant, I do not reflect the views of the government or the institution that I work for. These are purely personal remarks that I make. Thinking of this topic, I thought coming back to Sri Lanka to work is a very personal decision. It depends on your position in life, whether you have parents here, whether you have property here, how comfortable you are in the country you are in at present, and so on. So I don't think we should really look at it from our point of view, and in this present state of the country, where a great transition has taken place, and a new form of life is coming back to the country, I think our wish is that all of you come back. But I think that's a decision each of you need to make depending on your circumstances. But all of you would be concerned with the state of affairs in the country today. And that, I thought, we could share some views, and I think as the previous speakers have done, frank views on what has taken place in the country. Just to go back and put things in a context, I think two important factors which our leaders ignored at the time we got independence and since then is the fact that we are a multi-ethnic and a multi-religious society in Sri Lanka. We failed to create a national identity right in the post-independence era. And these two factors, these strands of these factors continue in the historical development of our country in the post-independence era. And we see so many factors. Life has changed in this country because we have not recognized those two factors. I come to the period when the majority community, 1956 was a great change, when there was the single-only cry, and we had the majority community and those who came to power on slogans of single-only, and we isolated the minorities, and we found to our horror that it resulted in 1983 in the other problems that we have, ending up with the period of war, 30 years. And of course, you can mark the other points in the history of our country. 1977 was a threshold period of change. Then 1983 again, and so on, till we came to a point where we had a constitutional amendment where every member of parliament had to take an oath in parliament, swearing allegiance to the unitary state of Sri Lanka. And that isolated the Tamil moderate leaders that we had in parliament and gave leadership, and all of them didn't take that oath. And the leadership of the Tamil community went on to a terrorist group. And the armed struggle for freedom began. And we know what happened in the 30 years. This was a very ruthless organization, a dictatorial organization with no inner democracy. And I think they've caused the death of many Tamil leaders, more than the Sinhalese would have caused. And in order to match that terror, you had a government which again became dictatorial, and the terror that you really, in order to fight the terrorist group. And at that time, people didn't mind the several brothers who were appointed to the cabinet. All the other things that were done, people bore because it was a kind of matching terror with terror. And people thought there was justification in doing that. And we came to a period when we defeated the organization, and we thought we would have a change after that. Well, the war is over. We closed our eyes to what happened. Bribery, corruption was there, and we thought now, since we defeated the terrorists, we'll have a period where we will bridge the back and build harmony and try to create a national identity of the country. But once you are in power and once you have a taste of power, as they say, no dictator loses an election. So we had continuous elections, but as Iran was rightly saying, no one thought in 2015 that we would have the old regime going back, defeated. No one thought it was a possibility. But the people of this country had come to a point when they rose up, rule of law was thrown aside, the separation of powers, the principles of separation of powers, there. It was a family feudal rule which people felt, with all the years of freedom that we had enjoyed, there was something in us which stood up. And we found a leader who really brought the country back to where we are today. So that, in short, is a brief history. And today we are at the crossroads. We were at the crossroads in January 8th. I remember we had meetings with the private sector, with the public sector, and we brought in a government that brought in change. Firstly, the freedom that we all enjoyed. Back again with the rule of law. I think Iran mentioned the changes that we made, the judiciary, the parliament, the supremacy of parliament, the collective decision making, taking away the kind of appointments that were made to diplomatic missions, your driver, your pen, or people sent out as if it was a feudal system that we had, and that changed. And in that process, we have brought about a government which is today a coalition between the two major parties in the country. So although we were united in defeating that era, but I don't think there was unanimity within the two parties on the economic growth of the country, on the economic policies of the country. So we have certain issues now cropping up because you don't have the UNP, for instance, has not come to power on its own policies. Iran talked of privatization. I don't think anyone could go out today because the people are not convinced of privatization yet. So it is a period where we are in a position of transition from one era to another, but we love the freedoms and the changes are embraced by all. But on the economic front, I don't think we have brought the changes that we would like to see the country. I think he talked of the privatization policies. For instance, all the state sector institutions that are there today, I don't think government need to be in business. But I don't think we can implement those. It has to be a step-by-step process, because it is very easy to go back to the masses and say that you are selling government assets, and why are they selling government assets? These are valuable assets of the country. So we have come to a situation where we have unity in the freedoms and the change of the constitution, the presidential system of government, but on all other fronts, we have a kind of transition that is taking place. Take education. There are 10,000 students that leave the country every year, but we cannot have private universities. There are one or two that are coming, but there is great resistance. There is a private medical college today, and the doctors are threatening to go on strike, the government doctors, if they are trained in government hospitals. We find that the exodus of students, that there are many who would like to come to Sri Lanka and study in great universities if you can. Then there are many foreign universities willing to come here and set up universities in this country. But we haven't been able to take IT, for instance. IT is taught only at the O level here in the country. We were trying to introduce a program where IT would be introduced at grade 6. But then again, we were to involve, because I was personally asked to get involved, and we invited the private sector, because it is not the lack of resources that government cannot start IT education at lower levels, but it is the fact, it is the lack of expertise and management skills of the education ministry and the department to get teachers trained, because there are labs, computer labs in approximately 50% of the schools, the larger schools, but they are all outdated with the software not licensed, and they are locked up, and the computer is many places locked up in the cabinet of the principal, because it's a valuable thing. He doesn't want it misused by people. So in that situation, to change, we had to bring in the private sector. But then I was asked by the former president, no private sector in government schools, and the whole scheme stopped. So take education, take health, same thing. Again, we have a private medical college, but there is no straight policy, because I don't think we can go and really tell the public, and the public are getting to realize this, but it takes a long time for the private sector to be accepted as the real engines of growth in the country, although the previous government also said that the private sector was the engine of growth. So you find this kind of problems, and coming to the living standards, that's where I could add on the new chapter and the beginnings of living conditions in this country. The UDA, the Urban Development Authority, of which I'm the chairman, has a very powerful act. And you would find Colombo has changed quite a lot if you really trace back your former visits to the country. And now you might find walkways, parks which have been redone. These are all good things. But the real purpose of the Urban Development Authority was not to do that kind of thing alone. It is to reorganize the city, to zone the city, to bring in planning into the cities, to bring in transport sector and the housing and other things into the city, and make those radical changes in Colombo, not only in Colombo, but in the cities of Colombo. If you take 5 cities of Sri Lanka, Kandy, Galle, Trinco, Jaffna, and so on, and if you make a change in those cities, we have a budget which allocates money to each sector, the irrigation department, the road department, the ministry that runs transport, then the education department, the health department. But all these ministries work on the budget in isolation, not in coordination with each other. So you find the roads being done in one town, but no one wants to move there because there is no A-grade school, there is no hospital. They don't come together. So what really urban planning means is to have this integrated approach on planning cities. And this government has brought in what is called the megapolis, which will really come in of the western region, embrace the western region in the near future. The plan has been done with the assistance of the Singaporeans, with the equivalent of the UDA in Singapore. And the plan will embrace the whole of the western region with satellite cities, 4 or 5 satellite cities being, and the areas will be demarcated. There will be areas for housing, for industry, and the road network and the transport system. You find today the roads are congested with traffic, and the only way you can come in to the city and ease the traffic system is not to use the roads, but to get your public mass transport systems working. And there again, there are plans to bring in, because you can only come into the city itself, not on roads, but either underground or over the streets. So there are plans now to bring in those systems of transport into the country, and very soon we will find those initiatives taken. Of course, it will take 2-3 years for it to happen. And what has been done in the roads and the other parks, what people don't know is the waste that has gone on in the past regime while this has been done. I think all of you are aware of the port in Hambantota, of the airport in Hambantota without planes, of the port being there without ships, and a huge convention hall which can seat 1,500 people with not a occasion, no festival or meeting takes place in that hall at least once a month. That's being mothballed. Quite apart from those ego-centered projects, even in Colombo, what has happened is a colossal waste of money. It looks good when you see, but if you really go towards Independence Square, the arcade, which has been done up, we have spent 800 million rupees in doing that up. We have, just to give you simple examples, we have a pond there with fish. The glass on top of the pond has cost 35 million rupees. And each fish inside is 65,000 rupees, and there are 200 of them. And the air above the water and the glass between is air conditioned. The extravagance that has gone on into, if you take the floating market, we have again spent 500 million rupees in doing that, and no one occupies that market now. There are 70 odd stalls, and only 16 or 17 are still with the vendors who have been shifted there. At the point of gunpoint, their shops were broken down and moved into this. So we find what really appears to be even the good work that has been done. There's a colossal waste of money that has gone on. The opening ceremony of the arcade one evening has cost 26 million rupees. 26 million rupees has been spent. So the change that is taken place today is not only the political, the freedoms and the freedom of the press and the judiciary, the separation of powers, the checks and balances between parliament and executive power. Not only those have been restored, but there is a change in the whole working of the government with regard to the economy. Of course, as I said before, you find that with the two parties there, with no unanimity on the economic policies, there are blocks which we see, but that is part of the whole system, and democracy means tackling those in a systematic, step-by-step manner. So the message that one really can give quite honestly is that we are in a new phase in the whole history of Sri Lanka. We have not settled all the issues. I don't think we could say that we are now on the right path to development, because there are fundamental issues which are still unsolved and which remain issues. And I think this is really progress towards bringing those freedoms which will enable those issues to be articulated to the people and finally find the people convinced. So from a point of view of someone who thought we had retired from actual day-to-day work. I was pulled back, but we are prepared to make that sacrifice, and that is the message that one needs to give to you too, because this is a period where people like Iran and the government should be strengthened. We should really give them enough courage so that the next changes, other changes that are there to come to make this country the real paradise that it is, a reality. So my message to you, everything is not hunky-dory, and you have problems, and there are issues we have yet to face, but I think we are at the point when a new chapter is to unfold in the country. It has already happened in certain freedoms, but on the economic and other fronts of living in the country, I think those changes are going to happen if you and I all contribute to make that happen. Thank you very much.